Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. Have you ever realized the most important thing you communicate in every conversation is the one thing you never intended to say? Welcome back to the Lead Well, Live Whole podcast. I'm Michael Sirmon, and as always, I'm grateful you've chosen to spend a few minutes with me today. I've been thinking about something recently that I don't think we talk about nearly enough, and honestly, it's something I've had to learn the hard way over the years. Have you ever walked into your house after work, and before you've even had a chance to say no, your spouse looks at you and asks, "Is everything okay?" Or maybe you've had one of your kids come up and say, "Dad, what's wrong?" And your first response is, "Nothing, I'm fine." The funny thing is, though, they usually don't believe you. In fact, they almost never believe you. I think that's interesting because at that point, you really haven't communicated anything with words. Maybe you've said one sentence. Maybe you haven't spoken at all. Yet, somehow, the people who know you the best have already picked up on something. They noticed the way you closed the door. They noticed how quickly you walked through the house. They noticed that your smile looked forced or that you seemed distracted. Maybe it was the sigh you let out as you dropped your keys on the counter, or maybe it was simply that your eyes looked tired. Whatever it was, they were already receiving a message before you ever intended to send one. That realization has stayed with me because I think most of us spend our lives trying to become better at choosing the right words. And while we're doing that, we're paying very little attention to everything else that we're communicating. We edit emails. We rehearse difficult conversations. We think carefully about how to phrase something so it doesn't come across the wrong way. All of that has value. Obviously, it has value. But it's important that we understand that our words are only one part of the conversation. People experience us long before they understand us. And if you've been married for very long, you already know this. If you're raising children, you've experienced it. If you've ever worked closely with the same group of people for several years, you've seen it happen there as well. The people around us become incredibly good at reading what we never intended to say. They notice our pace. They notice our posture. They notice whether we're making eye contact or looking past them. They notice whether we're fully present or whether our attention is somewhere else entirely. And they notice our speech patterns and our tone. And here's the part of that I think that's worth thinking about. Most of the time, they're not listening to our words, but they are trying to answer a question. And that question is, what does this person really mean? I mean, that's really the main question in every conversation, right? It's hidden underneath everything. What do they really mean? I can say, we need to talk. And depending on who's hearing those words, it can mean something totally different. One person hears an opportunity, another hears correction. Someone else immediately assumes they're in trouble. The words haven't changed, but the experience has. That tells me that communication has never been about only our vocabulary. It's about perception as well. I've always said communicating isn't saying what you want to say. It's ensuring the other person received the message you meant to send. I remember years ago hearing someone say that people may forget what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And in fact, I would probably say it a little differently now. I'd say people remember what they felt like in your presence. Think about the people you've admired the most. It probably wasn't because they always had the perfect words. In fact, you may not remember many of the conversations at all. What you do remember, though, is how calm they were when everyone else was anxious. You remember how they listened without rushing you. You remember that they didn't seem distracted while you were talking. They made you feel like, for those few moments, that you mattered. And that's a rare gift today. You know, we live in a world where everyone seems to be preparing their response while the other person is still talking. We become incredibly efficient at hearing words without actually listening to people. I catch myself doing it more often than I'd like to admit. You know, someone begins sharing something with me, and before they've finished explaining it, I've already started building my answer. Outwardly, I'm quiet, but inwardly, I've already left the conversation. One of my favorite songs, The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, says it best. In the song, they say, people are talking without speaking. People are hearing without listening. That was true back in the 60s when they sang it, but it's just as true today. But I wonder how often people in our lives, though, are experiencing that from us. And it's not because we're uncaring people, because we're not. And it's not just because we're busy, but it is because we're distracted. You know, we're carrying yesterday into today, and we're already trying to pick up tomorrow. And then whatever pressure we're feeling today is coming into the conversation as well. And over the years, I've become convinced that many communication problems aren't actually communication problems at all. They're internal struggles that simply find their way into our conversations. When I'm carrying stress, my tone changes before I even realize it. When I'm tired, my patience becomes thinner. When I'm discouraged, my face says things my mouth never intended to say. I mean, believe me, my face is an open book. And when I'm afraid of being wrong, I found myself explaining instead of listening. Or when my heart is not settled, it doesn't really matter how carefully I choose my words, because people can usually sense something underneath them. Something is off, something just not quite right. And I know that's a little uncomfortable to admit, but I think it's very true for all of us. It's also why I don't think becoming a better communicator is about learning techniques. There are plenty of books that will teach us how to negotiate, how to persuade, how to present ideas, how to navigate conflict. And those skills have their place for sure. But before any of those things come into play, there's a much simpler question. Who am I becoming? Who am I? Right? Because eventually, who we are always finds its way into how we communicate. If I'm becoming more patient, people will hear it. If I'm becoming more humble, they'll experience it. If I'm becoming more peaceful, that peace begins showing up in my conversations long before I ever mention it. And the opposite is true as well. Whatever is growing inside me eventually becomes visible to everyone around me. I read something recently on the Success-Minded website, and it goes like this. You're holding a cup of coffee when someone comes along and bumps into you, or they shake your arm, and they make you spill your coffee everywhere. Why did you spill the coffee? Most people will say, well, because someone bumped into me, of course. And that's really not the right answer. The right answer is you spilled the coffee because there was coffee in your cup. Had there been tea in your cup, you'd have spilled tea. Had there been water, you'd have spilled the water. Therefore, when life comes along and shakes us, which is going to happen, whatever's inside you will come out. It's easy to fake it until you get rattled, right? So you have to ask yourself, what's in my cup? When life gets tough, what spills over? Is it joy? Is it gratefulness, peace, humility, or anger, bitterness, harsh words and reactions? Believe it or not, you get to choose. And you know what reminds me? This reminds me of something that James wrote that has been a challenge to all of us. He says we're to be swift to hear and slow to anger. And for a long time, I thought it simply meant that we need to speak less. And that there's wisdom in that for sure. But I think James is pointing us towards something even deeper. He's inviting us to become the kind of people who value understanding before being understood. And that's much harder than it sounds like, right? Most of us genuinely want to understand other people, but we also want to be understood ourselves. The problem is that those two desires often compete with one another. If I'm busy making sure you understand me, I usually stop listening to understand you. Maybe that's why the best conversations I've ever had weren't with people who had all the answers. They were with people who made me feel heard. And I've been trying to practice something over the last few years, and I certainly don't do it perfectly. Before an important conversation, I try to pause for just a moment and ask myself 3 simple questions. What am I trying to communicate? What emotion am I bringing into this conversation? And perhaps most importantly, what do I want this person to experience when they walk away? I've noticed the answer to that third question can change everything. Instead of asking, how do I make my point? I began asking, how do I love this person well while I'm telling them the truth? Because those aren't the same thing all the time. Sometimes the truth needs to be spoken, and sometimes correction is necessary. Sometimes difficult conversations simply can't be avoided. But even these conversations can leave people feeling respected instead of diminished. They can walk away knowing they were valued, even if they were challenged. And I think Jesus modeled that beautifully. When you read through the Gospels, people didn't simply hear his words, they experienced his presence. Children were drawn to him. The broken weren't afraid to approach him. People who had spent years feeling invisible suddenly felt seen. Truth and grace were never competing with one another. Somehow, they existed together. Now, I've often wondered if that's what people should experience when they encounter us. Not perfection, not rehearsed kindness, not carefully managed emotions, just the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who we are and allowing that identity to shape the way we treat other people. So, before we finish today, let me leave you with one question I've been asking myself a lot lately. What is it like to be on the receiving end of me? Not when everything is going well, not when I've had a great day, but on the ordinary Tuesday afternoons when I'm tired, I'm running behind, I'm carrying stress, or I'm trying to solve 10 problems at once. What is it like to be the person sitting across the table from me, sitting on the couch with me, in the same room, in the conversation? Because whether we realize it or not, every conversation leaves something behind. It either leaves somebody feeling valued or leaves them feeling overlooked. It either builds trust or slowly erodes it. It either reflects the peace of Christ or the pressure we've been carrying all day. Our words matter. Yes, our words matter. But they're rarely the loudest thing we communicate. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this conversation gives you something to think about the next time you sit down with someone you love. Whether it's a coworker, a friend, family member, or even a complete stranger. You may discover that the most meaningful part of the conversation isn't the words you choose, but the person they experience while you're speaking them. So until next time, remember this. Leadership doesn't begin with a title. It begins with identity. And every conversation is another opportunity to reflect the heart of Christ. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Lead Well, Live Whole. If today's conversation raised a question you've been wrestling with, I'd love to help. I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals navigating pressure, transition, and important decisions. You can learn more at michaelsirmon.com.